Good afternoon. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. The words of Chief Seattle from 1854. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather today is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea, as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. And as we like to say, we are very grateful for the hospitality and generosity of our neighbors, the Suquamish. We also are grateful for the sponsorship of the Something to Talk About programs by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone has a memory care facility up on Rolling Bay, and they're in the process of finishing up work on assisted and independent living, and they are now accepting residents. If you'd like to learn more about that or their day stay and respite programs, call 360-689-4314. And Ann Lovejoy is here to introduce today's special guest.
Well, I'm thrilled that we have with us Barbara Lawrence again, one of our most popular, enduring presenters. Barbara, you always have such rich stories to tell and so much amazing way of bringing things to life. Like you make history seem vivid and present in a way that I think that's why we love to have you here. And we're thrilled that you're going to bring us a program today about the powerful Suquamish women through history, right?
Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, when we are thinking of another topic, I wanted to give you something that we haven't done before. And so the topic of strong, we have a saying on the resin, I think throughout Native North America, of strong Native women. We give that as a compliment to each other when we're going through tough times, or when we're anticipating, issues. You're a strong Native woman. Remember, you're a strong Native woman, and tell ourselves, I'm a strong Native woman. And I, a couple years ago, was driving with 3 little girls in the back seat, and they were grade school girls, and they were talking about their days and all that. And one of them said, and I wasn't listening to everything. And one of them said, and then tears wanted to come out of my eyes. And the other one said, but they didn't, because you're a strong Native woman. And I thought, oh gosh, I knew we adult Native women say this to each other. I didn't know our little grade school girls had to say this to each other. And at some point, it's okay not to have to be strong,
But it's also a beautiful thing to model, like for the young generation, like how you support each other in that. That's amazing.
Right. So then I decided to do a strong Native women of the Suquamish tribe presentation for you. So if you're ready, we can begin.
I think we're ready. Thank you.
So, as you can see, since time immemorial, our people have inhabited this beautiful place now called the Salish Sea. Our women have been the strength of our villages, held the memories of our past and the hopes of our future. So I don't exactly know how to pronounce this, her Lushootseed name. I'm just gonna wing it and say Kikismolo, and I'm also known as Princess Angeline. And I put her Lushootseed name first because people know her as Princess Angeline, and I want them to struggle like I do with her real name, because she deserves that. She deserves that. And somewhere along the line, somebody will know how to say it. But she's Chief Seattle's daughter. She was born in 1820. She died in 1896. And in that time, she saw great changes. She was raised in the Desaqua Longhouse on the main village of the Suquamish people on Kitsap Peninsula. If you ever go to the Chief Seattle Park, that little tiny 1-acre park is just a sliver of what that original village was. She married a man. She married a man from one of the British Columbia tribes, and I don't know which one, but there was a great potlatch at the Suquamish Longhouse when she was married. She lived up there with his people and had children. She returned home. I don't know the story of, often there's people become widows or widowers and return to their village, but also there was never any shame in ending a marriage and returning home. It was never a thing. They literally called it splitting the blanket, and they would, our blankets were made out of wool, and there was 2 blankets were put together and they were sewn down the middle with a single thread, and they could just take that thread out and split the blanket, which was what was known as getting a divorce, was splitting the blanket. So there are people descended from her and Chief Seattle that populate the tribe today. Leonard Forsman is one of those people. As an adult, she lived in the city of Seattle even after natives were excluded from the city. There was a time, and they were very serious about this, that no natives could be in the city of Seattle after sundown. She was the only one that was allowed to stay and live there. Founding members of the city favored her and hired her to do their laundry and housework, and so she was allowed to live in her little cabin in Seattle. When she found out about the longhouse was being burned down, that was in 1870, she rowed in her canoe over here by herself and landed at the village with the longhouse on fire. And she was throwing sand on the burning longhouse, screaming, "Me Sapa's house, me Sapa's house." Sapa, it means grandfather. And it was her grandfather, under the direction of him, Chief Sweeby, that longhouse was built, that village was created. And so she was doing, in her elder years, trying to put the fire out and save her Sapa's house. She's buried in one of the fancy cemeteries in Seattle, next to one of the main families of Seattle. They put her with their family, so she's over there. I visited that grave, and it's really beautiful. So she's definitely is one of the strong Suquamish women. So this is a man, and he's not Suquamish, but it's important that we learn about him. Edward Sheriff Curtis was born on February 16th, 1868, near Whitewater, Wisconsin. He was a white guy. He died October 19th in 1952 in Los Angeles, California. Born in Wisconsin, raised in Minnesota, Curtis's family moved to Gorst, Washington. And I never get over that. Gorst, Gorst, if anybody's been there, it's a curve in the road, really, literally a curve in the road. And so his family moved there when he was 19. In preparation for the move, the family, got all ready. Those were hard times back in the 1800s, and to make a cross-country move. And the property was purchased, arrangements were made, and right before the family set out, his father died. And so the family moved anyway. Well, that made Edward the oldest member of the adult male at 19 years old. So he moved his mother and his siblings out here to Gorst, Washington. So he was in love with photography all his life. It was a brand new science, brand new art, and he made his own cameras out of cardboard at one time. And now being in Gorst, Washington, and wandering around the waterfronts of the Puget Sound with his camera, he came across a Native woman who was gathering mussels off a boulder. And he approached her, and she rebuffed him, and he approached her again. And with his charm and sensibilities and a couple single dollar bills, he was able to get her to let him take her picture. And at that very moment, his entire future was born. He had an epiphany that these indigenous people would soon vanish. And he was moved to capture the images of the indigenous people before they were gone. Thus was the beginning of the rest of Edward Curtis's life and passion. He circled around Suquamish territory several times, taking many pictures of Suquamish people. Most of these photos were of Suquamish women and girls. Rarely are the names of his subjects included. So this is the actual first photo that he ever took of any Indian, and it's Princess Angeline. He took this picture in 1900. He titled it The Mussel Gatherer. And this started his life. If you have ever seen any of the Edward Curtis photos, that he traveled all over the whole United States, Canada, Alaska, Mexico, Central America, taking photos of indigenous people because he truly believed they were going to vanish. And a lot of his time was spent because so he had a photo studio in Seattle where he was making his money and supporting his family. But this passion of his took over and actually cost him dearly, cost him his relationship with his wife and with at least one of his children. And then he had to fundraise to keep going. His business was supposed to support his wife, and this passion was costing. So he had to go out and fundraise to make this happen. But here's a few of the photos of the Suquamish people that he took photos of. So here's a mussel gatherer. And this is the clam digger taken in 1899. There's no name associated with this photo. Curtis's notes about this photo says clams are important food to those that live in the vicinity of the clam beds. To others, they are comparative luxury obtained by barter. So we know that we trade with people who don't have clams and have always done that. You know, when you're an indigenous people and you have the wealth of your environment, then what you have in abundance, you trade for with somebody else that they have something that you don't have. Like I have no problem trading our clams for some of those ocean clams down there at Quinault, those razor clams they have. Oh my goodness. So this is a beautiful, beautiful photo taken in clearly in the Puget Sound. And that's one of our beautiful little Suquamish canoes. And I wish there was a name associated with it. Even though we can't make out her face, I would love to know who this was. And this is Suquamish woman taken in 1899. There is, again, no name associated with this image. I look at her and I imagine the different families that I can see in her face, that maybe she's a Pratt, maybe she's an Alexis, maybe, you know, I just wonder. And I so wish he would have took that one more minute to document people's names. Like sometimes he did, but not always. His notes on this photo: the tribes of the Northwest Coast had but the most elaborate and sophisticated material culture of any Curtis visited. He felt that of all cultures he had encountered, the people and customs found here were the least tainted by European influence. And I take all of that as a compliment. And here's the Suquamish girl. Again, no year, no plate number, and no name were found with this photo. There may be some of that information, but I couldn't find it when searching to use this photo.
And it looks like that blanket or the shawl that the woman before had on was the same as this. Looks like the same as this.
Which is exactly what I wrote in my notes here, that, that the shawl she appears to be wearing is the same as the previous one in Suquamish woman, and maybe they were taken at the same time. And, you know, maybe they're related, but, you know, again, we don't have any more information. Okay, now this is not a Curtis photo. This is a Suquamish tribal member by the name of Tennessee. Now, her actual Lachute seed name sounded like Tennessee, but this is what the non-Indians called her because they, you know, had difficulty with that name. I was unable to find the Lachute seed name, but there are families directly related to her still in this tribe. And if you just take some time and look at the baskets, they're placed in different positions. So you could see the bottom, the top, the sides, the materials, the different various sizes. Someone who is in this tribe who's directly related to her is named Danita Santos Holmes, and she is also a talented weaver. So these skills and talents definitely run in the family. Okay, so this one was taken in 1918 at Chief Seattle Days, and we have left to right Annie Rogers, Mary Jacobs, who is also Weesidolt, and that's the wife of Chief Wahalchu. Then Jack Davis, Jenny Davis, and Louisa Peters. What I want you to notice in this photo is speaker staffs, headbands, belts were all made of woven cedar, and these are all indicators of spiritual leadership and elders of the tribe. Weesidolt, being the wife of Chief Wahalchu, was, well, I don't want to get too ahead of my story, but they figure largely in the next few photos. What Chief Wahalchu was the leader of the Suquamish people after Jim Seattle. Jim Seattle was Chief Seattle's son. It was during Chief Wahalchu's leadership that the Indian agent ordered the burning of the old man house in 1870. And then provided lumber and nails, apple trees and pigs for the people to go off into individual allotments to be farmers, which never really happened. They used and because the Indian agent had to travel from, between 3 different reservations, once he left, the people used the lumber and the nails to build individual cabins on the same side as the longhouse, just up a little bit and side by side by side by side by side. So there's all these dozens of little cabins. We call them Boston houses because some of the first people that arrived were from Boston. So we called their houses Boston houses, which that word became posted in our language. Boston is posted, which means white. So it was a new word that came into our language from Boston to posted. And but anyway, so the village grew up around the burnt down village of these new little cabins. And so these are some of those people who lived in the longhouse and then who lived in the little tiny cabins, determined to stay a communal people, even if they had to build Boston houses. This photo, I don't have a year, but it's around the same time as the last photo. And sitting in the front is Jack Davis. In the first row, left to right, is Ellen Rogers, Louisa Peters, Jenny Davis, Annie Rogers, Stephanie Kitsap, unidentified, and Susie Napoleon. These families are still in the tribe today. Second row, left to right, Mary Adams, William Rogers, George Ely, who is my great-great-grandfather, in the far back in the thing that looks like a hat. And then Joe George, Sam Snyder, and I want you to note the headdress of cattail and swamp grass, which is something that is not an everyday thing. It's for dancing, and dancing was inside ceremonies and celebrations. These elders were some of the last people who lived in that longhouse and the subsequent village that they built at the same site. They were some of the last who remember the life before the invaders and before the dominance of the invaders, and they witnessed the turmoil and genocide after their arrival. So these are definitely in the category of strong Indigenous women and men. These 2 Suquamish women are in a cedar dugout canoe. This is a family canoe. The paddle on the right is in the Suquamish Museum in the permanent exhibit, and you can see it up close and personal. Just don't touch it. The names of these women are Jenny Davis left and Annie Rogers right in the Rogers family canoe. It's Annie Rogers paddle that is in the museum exhibit, and she used it every day, all the time, and it was made for her by her husband. She used it so much that where her hand rotated on the stalk of the paddle, it wore down very, very dangerously thin. And so she showed it to her husband, and he offered to make her a new paddle, and she said no. She wanted this paddle, and she wanted him to mend it. So you can see the mended paddle in the exhibit today. Okay, this is Bertha Ely. Her maiden name was Ely, and her married name was Lawrence Suquamish, and she's my grandmother. Leo Leonard Lawrence, Suquamish, Nahomish, and Danish, is my grandfather. Harry Henry Lorentzen is a Danish from Denmark, and my great-grandfather on my great-grandfather. And the three children's names are unknown. I know that Bertha and Leo Leonard Lawrence had multiple children, but they all didn't grow up to be adults. Bertha was a Suquamish woman and the daughter of Tom Ely, who is Suquamish, and the granddaughter of George Ely, who is Suquamish. What I don't know is the name of her mother or the name of her grandmother. And so I haven't given up hope finding their names. She was absolutely from the Suquamish village, and there's a map of the cabins that were built after the longhouse was destroyed, and two of them have her name, have Bertha Ely identified as the owner of two cabins there. So she was born and raised in the village after the longhouse was burned. Then she eventually moved to the George Ely allotment, which is just up the hill from Chief Seattle Park on that allotment. And together with her father and her grandfather and her husband, Leo Leonard Lawrence, they made a farm happen. And most of her children didn't live long enough to be adults. 3 of them outlived their mother, who died very young. Her last 3 children worked out of grade school when Bertha passed away. My father is her youngest child, and his mother died when he was 4 years old. She crossed over in 1927, and in her short life, she witnessed the disruption of the main village, the second main village, the uprooting from the second village to individual allotments, and the end of the communal way of life. The introduction of sugar, flour, coffee as staples, and the restriction of hunting, fishing, gathering away from and any form of culture and spirituality. She witnessed the death of most of her children. I'm going to say that again. She witnessed the death of most of her children. I don't know that pain, and I hope I never do. As well as most of the Suquamish people around her, because that was the time that diseases were running rampant amongst our people. One wonders what hope she found in daily life under these despairing times, with genocide carried out by the military and the children and the Christian forces all around her. And any children that lived were being swooped up and taken off to boarding school. So it's got to be one of the strongest Native women, and her story isn't unusual. That's the story of all Suquamish women at that time. That's what we have to remember. That's what happened to all of them and their families. Okay, so we talked about boarding school. Boarding school happened, and kids were taken as young as 4 and 5 years old, and they weren't brought back until they were adults, until they graduated high school. And you think of graduating high school, well, half the day at the boarding school was spent in doing labor, the labor of building the school, running the school, sewing the clothes, making the shoes, planting the crops, harvesting. The children were the labor force of the school. And so half the day was operating the school, and half the day was in classes learning the subjects that the non-Indians wanted us to learn. So I don't know these two women's names. I haven't given up, but I do know that the one wearing the Suquamish banner is Suquamish, and the one wearing the Tulalip banner is Suquamish. And there is an elder in this tribe who is a descendant of this Suquamish woman wearing this banner. I don't have the names of either of them, but I know that it's true. Okay, Julia Jacobs. So this is the woman. This is the woman. She was born in 1874. She died in 1962. She lived 87 years. She was born on the Cook House barge to a West Indies mother and a Guyanan father. Her parents were employed as cooks on a traveling logging company as they moved through the Puget Sound on barges. Her mother died in childbirth, and her father was left with a devastating choice. He could have his job or his newborn daughter, but not both. The logging company owner was complaining about this problem to the owner of the lumber mill on Bainbridge Island. The lumber mill owner was friends with Chief Wahalchu and his wife, Lisidult. They had lost all their children in the epidemics and were too old to birth any more children. They went with the mill owner to meet the father of Julia and offered to keep the baby and raise her until such a time as he could return. He was never able to return, as his life was not his own. So Julia was raised as the daughter of the chief and his wife. She was raised with all the privileges and responsibilities of high-born tribal children. Her first marriage, in her first marriage, her adoptive parents threw a great potlatch ceremony at the site of the old Desuqua village. Through the great longhouse, though the great longhouse was gone, the deliberate village site that was built up around this on the same site served as a ceremonial grounds. She married a Makah native and moved to Nia Bay. They had one child in that marriage, and she became a widow and moved back home. There was a second marriage and another potlatch ceremony, and to another native man from I don't know which tribe. There was one child born from that marriage. Again, she became a widow and moved back home. Her last marriage was to a Suquamish man. There was one more child born of this marriage. Children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren now populate the Suquamish tribe from this beautiful woman who carried the culture and taught her offspring this wealth of knowledge. Eddie Carrier is a Suquamish elder who was raised by Julia, his great-grandmother, and he is a nationally known and internationally known basket weaver and a scholar of baskets. And he learned his skill directly from his great-grandmother. So I don't have all the names of these people, but I think the one which is the third one from the right, I think that's Mabel Cordero, and that which was her married name, and by the look of their clothing, I think this was taken in the 40s, and it was Chief Seattle Days. They were cooking salmon for Chief Seattle Days, and of course, you know, women do a lot of the work. Women do a lot of the heavy lifting around tribes. Okay, Evelyn McMillan Gemmell, born March 1st, 1924, changed worlds June 23rd, 2017. She lived 93 years, and she was in the United States Navy from 1944 to 1946. Her parents were Claire McMillan. He was of Scottish background. Edith Alexis. Edith Alexis is one of the daughters of Julia. Edith was born in 1904 and died in 1978. Evelyn was born to her mother, Edith Grace Alexis, and her father, Claire McMillan, in Indianola, Washington, at the home in the family cabin on the beach. The midwife was her own grandmother, Julia Jacob. I pretty much told her Julia's story already. The Alexis and Jacob families are both large families with culturally rich and significant political roles in the Suquamish tribe who had leaders and artists throughout the family lines. These are characteristics that are apparent in Evelyn and in her children and now in her grandchildren. In those years, there were no roads to Indianola, only water access, ferry boat, or canoe or other personal boats. Evelyn was the oldest of 5 children. Raised in her early years in rural Indianola and in her later years in Tacoma, where her parents worked at Fort Lewis during the war years. The whole family joined the war effort, some in active military service and others in civilian work for the war effort. Evelyn joined the Navy. She met Len Gemmel, who was in the Army. They met very briefly and then corresponded through the US mail for 5 to 6 years until after the war was over, when they found each other and married and had 9 children. Joining the service was a natural accomplishment for Natives, as it was a cultural indicator of Native people to protect their people and protect their territory. Add to that non-Indians rarely hired Natives to work at jobs that paid money. Military service was accepted by Natives, and Natives were accepted into the military as a respected and paid profession. In fact, when accounted for by ratio, more Native American men and women enlist in the US forces than any other ethnicity of the United States. Furthermore, more Native Americans earn more medals of all kinds in the services than any other group of Americans. Evelyn returned to Suquamish after both she and her husband retired. They were raising one of their grandchildren and wanted to do so on the Port Madison Indian Reservation, where there were social, cultural, housing, educational opportunities for the family. Once home, Evelyn and her husband Len and their grandchild fully enjoyed and participated in the Suquamish culture, activities, events, and rich social life. One more strong Suquamish woman. Okay, Clara Saigo Jones carried the Suquamish language and real life stories and teaching. She somehow, even though she was taken off the boarding school as a young child and raised in the boarding schools until she was, graduated high school, she still held on to the Suquamish language, the Lushootseed language. She held on to it. And at the boarding school for all those years, you weren't allowed to speak it. You weren't allowed to tell stories or do anything cultural. She held on to it. She was fully fluent for her whole life. She taught us about the game Come Forth Laughing, which teaches Suquamish children to control their emotions through playing a simple game. And all you need is a bunch of kids, the beach, 2 sticks, and a clamshell to play this game. And it's really, really fun, and it truly is an important game that young Suquamish children were taught. Marion Forsman Boucher, born in the 50s, Marion was raised on the Suquamish Port Madison Indian Reservation. She went to school to be a dental hygienist. She continued her education and was a strong advocate for education from cradle to grave. She was elected to the Suquamish Tribal Council and took her public service seriously. She worked for North Kitsap School District as a Native American Program Director and for the Suquamish Tribe as a Higher Education Program Director. She was, I believe, one of the first people placed on the Kitsap County Council on Human Rights, I believe. She was a director of the human resources for the Port Madison Enterprises until her death. Well, and she died young. I want to say she was in her 50s. And her time being a dental hygienist and working in dental clinics close to radiation is what gave her breast cancer. And in those early years, there wasn't enough knowledge about protection. She lived and throughout her entire life, she was a fierce advocate for Native women, Native children, and sovereignty. This is her running one of the Chief Seattle days in the 70s. So, well, this is less about me and my sister as it is about the the elders of the tribe who would come and gather us all up in station wagons and bring us to the community hall, which was it was a library. It had been in its life, the building had been a library and a theater, and had a stage and all that in a huge gathering, great room. It was made out of beautiful old wood, but it was dilapidated. It was actually condemned and dangerous, which is the only kind of buildings that we as the tribe were allowed to use. And so when we were learning our dances, we had to kind of dance in a triangle instead of a circle because of how much of the floor was rotted out. But we went there, and as soon as we saw those, specific station wagons of the different elders in the tribe, we all piled in and went down there, and we learned our dances and our songs and drumming and all that. And I look at this picture and I can remember the day the picture was taken, and all the many, many years of practicing dancing and learning any of the culture that there was to learn. Okay, Nancy Alexis, again, a descendant of Julia. Here she is holding her first child. Nancy was born in the early 50s and was for her first few years, she was raised on the Suquamish Port Madison Indian Reservation. When she and her 4 sisters were still young, they became orphans and were taken by the Catholic Church and placed in Catholic foster homes, each one placed separately away from the others. I'm going to say that again, because that was also very common. Each one was placed in a separate Catholic foster home away from the others. So it wasn't bad enough that they were orphans and had to be taken into foster homes. It was separated completely, all of them, from each other. When Nancy became an adult, and I mean between 18 and 21, she came home instantly and began to fight to gain custody of her sisters. She was one of the first and main Indian child welfare activists, and in fact did gain custody of all but one of her sisters and brought them back to Suquamish. It was a long, hard battle, and she won. These Suquamish elders left to right are Marilyn Wandry, Carrie Rock, Marjorie Napoleon, and Ivy Cheney, and they're waiting for the decision concerning the state of Washington to return the Old Man House Park to the Suquamish tribe. The very date of this photo was June 30th, 2005. Oh, the very date of this photo was June 30th, 2005, that the transfer actually happened from the state of Washington to the Suquamish tribe for this little tiny 1-acre park, which really cost the state more money to operate than it was worth to them. And it was worth untold culture, dignity, history, sovereignty. I mean, it was just worth more than money could ever describe to us to get that 1 acre back. Aggie Pratt, born in the late 40s, a poet, a painter, an activist, an elder, a former tribal council member, a mother, a grandmother, and so much more. Aggie attended the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, when she was young and became a talented painter and a published poet. She is a force to be reckoned with to this very day still. Peg Deem, born in the late 60s. Peg attended Chilocco Indian Boarding School in Oklahoma. Once graduated high school, she then attended the Institute of Native American Arts in Santa Fe. She's a recognized singer, traditional song catcher, artist, mentor, mother, grandmother, and cultural bearer. She is here welcoming the canoes at the Suquamish waterfront during Canoe Journey Protocol. Peg has fundraised several times to hold classes and provide cultural and arts experiences for young tribal members to learn wool weaving, cedar weaving, singing, dancing, and to teach all forms of cultural traditions. Jamie Gooby, I want to say she was born in 77 or right about thereabouts, because that she's the same age as my daughter, my oldest daughter. She's a daughter of Jay and Joni Mills, granddaughter of Luther and Delora Mills. And Jamie is a director of the Tribal Government and Human Resources Department. She has served in this position for many years. In her work, she has mentored dozens of Suquamish tribal members through the doors and into their careers and futures. I have to say that when you are a Native and you are navigating your life through the generations of trauma that are weighing you down and current and pervasive racism and ignorance in the dominant society, it sure is a gift to enter employment for our own people with directors like Jamie Gooby waiting to assist you with paperwork, interviews, and preparation for your future. She really is that happy and that optimistic and that much of a bright and shiny star. You could take a picture of her any day of the week, any time of the day or night, and she's going to be smiling and looking like that with bright eyes, looking at a bright future for us. Robin, Little Wing Saigo, born, I want to say 76, 77, is a mother, a leader, a director of strategic planning and research department, former tribal council member, foster parent, public speaker, and mentor. Robin has a BA and an MSW. Robin gives tirelessly, and I want to believe that both of those BA and MSW are from the University of Washington. I'm positive. Robin gives tirelessly to her tribal community and always proactive for women's issues, girls' issues, children issues, and the arts. She's truly a Wonder Woman, and I love the pose. I believe this was at a protest march for Stone Child. Lydia Saigo, this is Robin's little sister. Lydia Saigo is a Suquamish tribal member who's also a mother, an auntie, and a new grandmother. She has been a curator and an archivist for the Suquamish Museum and a gooey duck diver for many years. Once she was diving during a break, she called her sister to check on her son, who was then a baby. Hearing her young son crying, her motherly instincts took over. She convinced the pilot of the dive boat to steer closer to the dock. She jumped from the dive boat into the water, swam to the dock, ran up the dock, and drove herself to where the baby was being babysat. And the baby, by the time she got there, the baby was sound asleep. Mother and child bond intact. Lydia has been a force of nature her entire life. In her personal life, she and another Suquamish woman, Bryna Lawrence, yes, my daughter, devote time and energy in collecting and donating clothes and food directly to Indigenous homeless people of the city of Seattle. Kate Avakana, Suquamish tribal member, daughter of Peg Deem and Larry Avakana, mother to Shyla and Nettle. Katie began her art career as a young woman making t-shirt designs and poster art. Kate has created art in fabric, glass, wool, cedar, paint, metal, large, small, and huge. Her art has graced the insides of museums, art galleries, tribal offices, and schools. She has curated murals on walls of tribal schools and community centers. Currently, she is creating a series of hanging canoes that will grace the ceiling of the new Washington State Ferry Terminal at Coleman Dock. She has already finished the installation of her Coast Salish metal art at the ferry terminal Mukilteo. Kate's art informs viewers of her people's place in history and in the contemporary Salish Sea and our traditional lands. So, you know, there's been times where people say, what good is it to say the land acknowledgement? What good is it really? What does it do? How does it change our lives? Well, coming from a time when people would tell us, you have to stay over there on that reservation, you can't leave, you can't do, you know, I mean, that was in my dad's time, my father's time, his mother's time. It wasn't ancient history. It was not that long ago. So when we have now been saying, and people around us have been saying the land acknowledgement, it sinks in, it gets there. People start saying it, they start knowing it, they start believing it, and then they start looking around at things like roundabouts and ferry terminals and entrances to towns and counties and places and environmental areas, lakes and rivers and streams and that, and they start wanting to know what's the Lachute seed name for that place. You know, what is this place important for? And that's when you start having installations of art that is functional and art, you know, so and then that reinforces for more generations who we are, where we're from, and what this place is about. So the first three directors of the Suquamish Museum, Carrie Caldwell, a non-Indian, the blonde with the glasses on and the happy smile, Leonard Forsman, and Marilyn Jones. So Marilyn Jones carried the culture of the Suquamish Museum for many years, first as a tour guide, then as a researcher, third as an archivist, and finally as museum director. She currently holds the position of Suquamish Tribal Heritage Specialist, and as such, she researches and records sacred places and places of importance for hunting, gathering, and fishing. And those become part of the archives. She records elders or fishermen, hunters, gatherers. She records them saying where they go, what they do. And even if they're like living in a nursing home, what do they remember? Where did they go? Where was that berry patch? Where did you hunt? Where did your father hunt? Where did your grandfather? All of that's important information. And she gathers that from everybody who will allow themselves to be interviewed, and all of that is important. And so she still, as an elder herself, is still carrying on this important role. Annie Forsman, who is a young woman, I don't even think she's 40 yet, and she's highly intelligent. She's the daughter of Tony Forsman. She's the niece of Leonard Forsman and the niece of Marion Forsman Boucher. So with that family line, you know she's going to be intelligent and an activist, and she is the new director of Washington State Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Peoples Task Force. Her office is in the city of Seattle, and any of those announcements that you see, those alerts of missing Indigenous women, come from her office. And it was her work that got the attention of the governor and got this position created. The Suquamish Tribal Council are 7 elected officers of the Suquamish tribal government. There's usually been 1 or more women on council, and sometimes women are the chairperson of the tribal council. The current, now this photo is already old. When I started making this a while back in February, then we had elections in March. So it's already, we had elections, so there's different people, but Danita is still on this. In February, when this was current, the Suquamish Tribal Council has Danita Holmes, 3rd from the left, and Wendy Anderson, 6th from the left. So now Wendy Anderson chose not to run again, and yet there is another Suquamish woman in that position, Irene Carper, who's been on Tribal Council before and who is the, I believe, COO of the Port Madison Enterprises Clearwater Casino. Danita teaches at Chief Kitsap Academy, as well as working on her master's degree. And while you might not be able to tell unless you have a big screen, she's wearing a wool skirt, which is a traditional garment of our people. She not only makes them for herself, she teaches kids in Chief Kitsap Academy to make wool regalia. And if you were at Bainbridge Island Museum of Art recently, just a few days ago, there was a sovereign style fashion show, and you might have seen her work. I'm sure you saw some of Danita's work there. And Danita is, I'm going to remind you of Tennessee. She's the great niece of Tennessee, who was a weaver. Kalina Stephanie Alexis Lawrence is a Suquamish woman, a singer, a songwriter, an activist, a motivational speaker, and a mentor to many Native youth. Kalina is the daughter of 2 Suquamish members from 2 strong families, the Alexises and the Lawrences. Kalina was raised in foster care inside and outside the tribe until finally landing in the home of her father's cousin, my brother Bill Lawrence and his wife, Marjorie Lawrence. Quickly, Kalina began calling them mom and dad, and as she thrived in this, her final foster home and her stable home, she began to sing, dance, write, speak, and mentor others. She now has a website and many meaningful songs that are powerful in their Indigenous messages. Kalina has supported her birth parents' journey through sobriety and into sobriety and gaining their strength in their elder years. So there's a happy ending all the way around here. Not only did she come from struggle, she was born in struggle, and her first several years were tumultuous. She landed with both feet on the ground in a stable tribal family home, thanks to Indian Child Welfare. And then she modeled sobriety to her parents, to her birth parents, and has witnessed them in their healthy remaining years of their life. You got to hear some of her songs on one of our previous shows. Cousins Julian and Kaliska Lawrence graduated high school during the pandemic in 2021. As is the culture of the Suquamish tribe, graduates are given beautifully carved canoe paddles, not just a piece of art. These paddles are carved by Julian's father, my son, Ian Lawrence, and can be used on canoe journeys by the graduates. They can be used as actual paddles in the water. They're strong, they're beautiful, and they're strong. The reason why we give paddles to our graduates, and that's if they graduate high school, get a GED, graduate any level of college or vocational school, is because it's a way, it helps guide you through life. Here is a way to symbolically and in actuality get through life, get through hard times. And it reminds people that you're from a canoe culture, and if you're in a canoe, there's a leader and there's people beside you, in front of you, behind you, literally, and all working together to get through whatever the environment is going to give us. Rough waters, calm seas, wind, rain, hot sun. So it symbolically shows you that you could get in a canoe by yourself with one paddle. It's possible. You can get somewhere. It's going to be difficult. But as soon as there's two or more, the community that is in a canoe, the community that is in a tribe, it brings you through life. So this is the actual, tangible, real message and piece of art that you're handed when you graduate from this tribe. Okay, and here's our final slide. And I'm not sure, did we make it to 1 hour? This is Tiana Lawrence. She is 6 years old in this photo. She's 7 years old now. She's a young Suquamish girl, and yes, my granddaughter, looking toward the future with her feet firmly planted in a Suquamish youth canoe, the Qualqualahesh, the killer whale, and wearing a cedar bark hat made for her by yours truly. This young one knows her canoe culture. She is learning her language, and she has the hopes of our tribe in her heart. This photo was taken in 2022, the Suquamish canoe journey to Blake Island. So it was during the tail end of the pandemic when we didn't want to have a canoe journey and thousands of people coming together, and the danger but we really needed to get on the water. So we just took our own people in our own canoes and our own support boats, and we went to one of our own islands, just right over there for 3 days and nights, and spent time wandering around that place and reacquainting ourselves with our special place that is Blake Island. And it was pretty wonderful. The weather was terrible when we took off. We actually had to all get off the dock and hide in the House of Wake and Culture because of the lightning and thunder. And then we had to wait for it to stop and then get in the canoes and go over. And then it was beautiful by the time we were on the water. And on the way back, we were dealing with the wind against us coming through Agate Pass. So it was a tough pull. And there were several canoes, and one of them were all young girls, and they were, the only adult was the skipper. And they pulled hard and got through that weather and landed for our celebration that we had. When we host anyone, we celebrate for them, and we give gifts to them and food to them. and, you know, make it all about whoever is our guests. For this one, we celebrated ourselves. It was much, much smaller, but it was a great celebration. And so that's what I want you to remember is that little girl looking to the future, inside her culture, doing, she's doing what others couldn't in generations before her, and she's doing with no fear whatsoever. And that is women of Suquamish, strong Native women of the Suquamish tribe.
Oh, Barbara, it's only some of them you can tell. And you only included yourself as a child, but you're definitely one of those very strong women models for sure.
Thank you.
Is there anybody got questions or somebody in the chat? Oh, Nikki just said, great talk. Thank you, Barbara. If anyone has questions, put them in the chat or jump in.
A question.
Okay.
Could you say something, Barbara, about the canoe journey that's coming up and how we as outsiders might be able to enjoy that?
The destination is going to be Muckleshoot, which means the Seattle waterfront, and that's shared territory with the Suquamish and the Muckleshoot people. And so for us, that would be just going across the water. That would be like the shortest journey ever. So we're going to go all the way up to Lummi and join them coming down. There's a number to call. If you go to our website and look around, there's a number to call if you want to be a volunteer for anything, really, for canoe journeys, for Chief Seattle Days, for, all kinds of things. We have opportunity for volunteers. And so there's our website. In my mind, I don't have the exact dates of canoe journey, but it's always in July, and it always ends at the end of July. Everybody starts where they are and joins in and goes to the destination site. I know that we will be hosting again as the final destination in 2029, right? Yeah, 29, because we hosted in 89 and 2009. So we'll be in 2019. So in 2029, we'll host again. So we want to do those. We want to keep that going.
Barbara, I've seen some notifications that anybody's welcome to go help make some of the little gifts that.
Oh yeah, we're doing it every Thursday here at the building that I work in, which is on Sandy Hook Road, 15838 Sandy Hook Road. In the top floor in the culture area, there's every Thursday from 11 a.m. until 6 p.m. there's work parties to make necklaces or little baskets or little rattles or headbands out of wool. It's any number of things that you can do, and there's always people there to help teach people if they don't know how to do it. And all the supplies are there. We just need the willing hands. And if you make one thing, that's one more thing for the giveaway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you saw in the chat, Jazz Ortiz said, great work, very well put together, and so inspiring to see so many strong Native women. And Katie Kursus also said, thank you so much.
Thank you.
These get viewed quite a lot after the fact too, because many people are day busy, but I just feel like you're creating a treasure for us that we hope will be a treasure for you as well. Looking at your history, your amazing stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for always being willing to share Suquamish culture and history. I really appreciate it. I know the tribe does.
Anytime.